Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining me today. Good afternoon, or if you're in a different time zone, good morning, good evening, whatever time of day it happens to be. I'm Natalie McLeese. I am founder of an accessibility testing platform called Aardvark. And every other Wednesday afternoon, I do a live stream on all different aspects of accessibility. So today, our topic is WCAG 3.0. We're going to be reading the spec together live, and I promise it will be at least 10% more interesting than watching grass grow. All right. We're not going to read it through. Like, we're not going to start at the top and read all the way down. I've already scoped it out. I have some important parts that I want to share and different things that we're going to talk about. And the reason that we want to do this is that if you try to do a web search for WCAG 3 right now, you'll get results making all kinds of claims about what's in WCAG 3, what's not in WCAG 3, and a lot of them are inaccurate. And the reason for that is mostly that it's a standard that's still under development. So there are all kinds of things changing about it. And so some of the things people are writing about it were true at one point in the past with a different draft. So what I have up on the screen right now is the current draft. So it was released March 3rd. So it's a little over 5 months old. And it is what we have currently for WCAG 3.0. And we're going to go through it. We're going to figure out what the status of this document is exactly, what we can learn from it, what do we need to do to get ready? Is it time to start getting ready? And I'm going to put your mind at ease right away, right at the beginning. You don't have to do anything about WCAG 3 today, and not tomorrow, and not next week, and probably not even next year. Okay, so our current standard is WCAG 2.2 AA, and of course, if you're concerned about meeting legal requirements, that is going to depend on where you live, what jurisdiction you live in. So some jurisdictions are 2.0 AA right now, some are 2.1 AA, some are 2.2 AA, some are 2.1 but changing to 2.2 soon, or 2.0 but changing to 2.1 soon. So you have to figure that out for yourself. And we'll talk a little bit about WCAG 2. But also what I would like for you to take away from this is not just what's in the current spec for WCAG 3, but how to actually go through and read these spec documents so that you can understand them for yourself, so that when the next working draft is released in another 6 months or another year from now, or whenever the next draft is coming out, that you'll be able to actually pick that up and know what you're looking for and go through and check it out for yourself so that you can understand it. And then when you read some of the claims that are out on the internet about what is or isn't in WCAG 3, you'll be able to actually check it yourself pretty easily against the primary source. So I hope that you pick up a skill today that actually outlives this particular draft that we're looking at today. So the first thing that I want to talk about is we're looking at two different documents today. So I have the actual WCAG 3 accessibility guidelines, the current working draft, which again was published March 3rd of this year. And then there's also this very nice document, the explainer for the W3C Accessibility Guidelines 3.0, which you notice was published the exact same day, right? So it's the exact same age. So we're going to be going back and forth between these two documents and kind of jumping around. I'm going to try not to scroll too much because I know that it's a movement that you're not in control of. I'm going to try to, as much as I can, use the table of contents, which is available. I am zoomed in a little bit here. On a wider screen, we would actually see it on the left hand. And maybe I could drag this out a little. No, it's not going to work. Okay, so I am zoomed in a little bit just to make sure that this is big enough for everybody to see, but I can use this link down here at the bottom to jump to the table of contents. And so I go straight there without any animation or movement on the screen. So I'm going to try to do that as much as possible today. And I'm going to actually get started by bringing up a separate window for the first thing I want to talk about. So this is the narrow window that I just opened on the left is another view of the exact same document that's in the bigger screen on the right. On the left, we just have section 1.1.2. And the reason that I have that open is because this has really important information about the status of this document that I'm not going to memorize, and I don't expect you to memorize. So I thought it might be helpful to have this up for reference as we look at different parts of the document. So if we go to table of contents over here and I go to section 1.1.2, you can see it's the exact same thing, right? So I'm just looking at a section of this document in a separate window. And let me go ahead and go back. So we're just at the top. So let's poke through this section 1.1.2, which tells us that each section of this document has a status that tells us how far along this particular section of the document is. And are we ready to adopt this? Are we ready to give feedback on this, etc.? So we have 5 options for status, and they would typically go from top to bottom in status order. So first up, if something is marked as a placeholder, that is just temporary content, right? And all they're trying to do is show what type of content might go in this section. They don't want any feedback on that content, and you shouldn't take any of that to heart and try to implement it or follow it or anything like that, right? It's just placeholder. So the next phase would be exploratory, and they tell us that this content is not refined, that there may be details missing, and the working group is still exploring what direction to take with this section of the document. And if you want to provide feedback on this section of the document, it should only be about the proposed direction. So not digging into any of the specific details or anything like that. All they're looking for is feedback on the direction. All right, and then next it would go to developing status, which means that the working group has roughly agreed on what's going to be in this section, what it's going to look like. They may have added some details, but they're not quite final yet. And if you want to give feedback on a section marked as developing, then they want you to focus on making sure that it's usable and reasonable in a broad sense, right? So we're getting a little bit more refined. We're moving along through the process. And then the fourth status is refining, which means this content is ready for wide public review. And if you want to be an early adopter, right, you could try adopting this experimentally. The working group has reached consensus, and now we're open to feedback from the public on the feasibility of actually implementing this part of the document. And then finally, we have mature, which is, we think this is done. We think we're done, right? And if you have any feedback, it should be on edge cases, right? Or maybe you've got some kind of situation that you don't think the working group anticipated or thought of for that particular section. All right, so I will tell you right now, there is nothing in WCAG 3 that has passed developing. So there's nothing in refining, there's nothing in mature. So everything is placeholder, exploratory, or developing. So everything we're going to see today is in one of those 3 statuses. So not done. So all we know is this is what it is right now. We can't say if it's going to stay that way. We just don't know. So that's what we want to keep in mind. So that's why I'm going to keep this up on the side, because you'll see that different parts of this document are actually marked with their current status so that we can figure out how much should I be paying attention to this, right? So is this final? Is this a done thing? Or is this something that they're just exploring, and maybe this will be it and maybe it won't? And there have been several things already that have been part of WCAG 3 at one point and are not in the current in the current spec document. So lots of stuff has already been moved out, but you'll still find a lot of articles referring to those things that were moved out. And we'll talk about what some of those things are. All right. And then, all right, so we've got, I'm going to leave this up. We're going to start, I'm going to leave it with placeholder, exploratory, and developing visible. And I know my head's over part of developing. If we need to read it again, I'll put it so it's in view so that my head isn't blocking the way. And then I would just like to point out a couple of things. So the first one would be, if I go here, oops, sorry, hold on one second. If we go to the table of contents and go to the status of this document, there is this sentence right here. This is something important that we want to pay attention to. This is a draft document and may be updated, replaced, or obsoleted by other documents at any time. It is inappropriate to cite this document as other than a work in progress. So straight from the horse's mouth, right? We shouldn't be paying too much, we shouldn't be putting too much stock in anything that exactly that is claimed here, because it's all subject to change and might be different. All right. And then if we take a look at code number 3, let's see, where do I have that? Oh, I've already lost my place. Here we go. So it'll be this one. Is it? All right, hold on. Let's see. Let me bring this over here. All right, so this is our timeline that we have for right now. So WCAG 3 is currently an incomplete draft. It is intended to develop into a W3C standard in a few years. No hard deadline, so no idea on exactly when it's going to be finished. And then we also have, was it in this document? Sorry, I've lost my place a little bit now. 2.2. 3. I saw that linked from somewhere. Oh, here we are. The reassurance. That's this one. All right. CAG 2. Let's see. Looking for a certain sentence that was in here. Okay, yeah, I didn't think it was this document for some reason. I think I messed up in my notes. Sorry, give me 1 second. Let's see if I can find this sentence I'm looking for. Yes, here we are. This is what I was looking for. All right, so this is our introduction section, section 1 of our main document. And this is very important information right here, that WCAG 3 does not replace WCAG 2. WCAG 2 is used around the world and will still be required by different countries for a long time to come. So we're going to have an option at some point in the future. We're going to have 2 standards, 2 and 3, and laws will take time to update and change, as we see now, right? It's like there are still jurisdictions where WCAG 2.0 is the current standard that they have adopted, and that came out in 2008. So it is 18 years old at this point, right? So this kind of thing, it doesn't tend to change on a very fast basis. So don't be too concerned about it. And then the other thing that I found very reassuring in here was this sentence, which says that meeting WCAG 2 at AA level means you will be close to meeting WCAG 3, but there may be differences. So all the work that we're doing now doesn't go to waste. We're all good. We should just keep trying to meet WCAG 2 at AA level, and then we're probably going to be in pretty good shape when WCAG 3 is finalized and actually released for everybody. We're going to be at least most of the way there, is what they're making it sound like, right? We don't have to do too much to try to get ready. ahead of time. We can just keep following the guideline that we have, and that will put us on a good path for when WCAG 3 is actually ready. All right, so let's take a look at section 321. Sorry, I do have to scroll a little bit here. Let me try to just use page down to keep the motion to a minimum. There are so many. So section 2 is our new requirements. So we'll go through those in a little bit. So 321, conformance level. So here we have, this is kind of interesting. So as we know in WCAG 2, we have A, AA, AAA conformance levels. The proposal for WCAG 3 is that we'll have new conformance levels, which they are calling bronze, bronze being the minimum level of conformance. And here's all we know about exactly what that means right now, is that all of the pages and views and processes within the conformance scope, so like within the website that we're testing basically, must satisfy all the core requirements and some portion to be determined of the supplemental requirements and assertions within each functional performance statement. And we'll talk about what all of those different things mean, because WCAG 3 so far is very different from 2 in the way that it is organized, I would say. And you'll see when we actually look at section 2, and we'll go through some of the guidelines, a lot of them look very familiar. Okay, silver level conformance. So again, all of the pages within our scope must satisfy all the core requirements and a larger portion of the supplemental requirements and assertions than in bronze. So again, it's very vague. There's no exact number. There's no exact guidance of how we would actually meet conformance. It's just this general idea that we're going to have bronze, silver, gold, and you're going to do a little for bronze, more for silver, and even more for gold, basically. And we see for gold conformance, all of the pages and processes within the conformance scope satisfy all of the core requirements and a larger portion of the supplemental requirements and assertions than in silver. So the gold and silver basically read exactly the same, except this says than in silver. So we have to do a little bit more. Now, I do want to scroll back up to the top of section 3. And it actually, okay, sorry, let me get back down there. 3, because at the top of that section is where we're going to see the status of section 3 is exploratory, right? So exploratory, this content is not refined. Details and definitions may be missing. We definitely saw that. The working group is exploring what direction to take with this section, and feedback should be about the proposed direction. So that's all we know, and it's very vague, and there's a lot of details that need to be filled in. But that's where we happen to be right now. And then they also have this nice green section, which actually, if you're interested in getting involved in this process, which by the way, you are invited to do, now all of us can participate in this process. And at the end, I'll show you exactly how to do that. They actually have this editor's note where they're asking specific questions of us as the potential future users of the WCAG 3 conformance guideline, right? What do we think about these different things? So this is specifically the things that they are asking for feedback about for this particular section right now, which is, should the core set of requirements provide approximately the same coverage as WCAG 2.2 A and AA? Should they be smaller or larger? And if you think it should be a different size, what rules should be included or excluded, right? Should we include assertions within the core set? And we'll talk about assertions so that we know what those are. It's actually a really interesting part of the new spec. And would organizations be willing to make public attributable assertions about processes they completed? So an assertion is a new thing, and it is a part of your process. So if I'm building a website, right, you have the actual website that I made, and that can be tested, right? I can run an automated scan on it. I can try to use it with a screen reader. I can try to use it with just a keyboard, and I can try to figure out how accessible is this website. What I can't see or test when I'm looking at a website is what was the process behind this website? How was it put together? And the assertions are an opportunity for companies, individuals, etc., to share what was part of their process. So it's not something that could be directly tested, which then raises the question, well, can a company just make an assertion and nobody can actually test it and tell if they're telling the truth? So that's one of the open questions that we have here, is like, what kind of proof do we need about these assertions? And we'll look at what some of them are a little bit later on. Should there be additional levels within the core set of requirements? And then every provision within the minimum conformance level has to be met to conform with the lowest level. And then additional effort must be done to better support people with disabilities, but WCAG 3 allows some flexibility on what and how that effort is provided. Does that approach work? So if you have opinions about any of these things, you can jump in, get involved, share your opinions. There's an email group, there's a GitHub repo where everybody is invited to actually participate. So those are the things that they're actually looking for guidance on, or input from everybody right now. So we hear a lot of things like, I've seen a lot of articles that say that WCAG 2 has success criteria and WCAG 3 has outcomes. That was true in an earlier draft. In this version of the spec, which is the most recent one we have, they are actually called requirements. So they're even changing what the different types of organizing are actually called. And then you may have come across something letting you know that there was like a 0 to 4 score involved, where you would go through each of the outcomes, or I guess we would now say requirements, and they would get a score on a scale of 0 to 4. That was part of an earlier spec that has been abandoned at this point. And if we go over to the explainer is nice because it's some nice language about what's happening in the document, but it also shares some nice history about things. So if we jump over to section 7.2, they actually talk a little bit in this explainer about some of the concepts that are being considered. And so we have the issue severity, that severity ratings could contribute towards scoring and prioritization. So they maybe haven't completely abandoned the idea of having some kind of scoring built in. And then they have, I don't know how to say this word, I would say adjectival ratings, right? Which would give us something beyond pass or fail, which is basically all we have in WCAG 2, right? It's pass or fail. Like, did you add alt text to all of your images? Yes or no? And that's all we've got. So they're saying maybe we could have fail, pass, exceptional, or fail, progress, pass, better, exceptional, like some way that we could actually demonstrate progress as people are working on their websites. And then they also are introducing this idea of pre-assessment checks that you could use to determine if you're ready to assess conformance. And I think this is really interesting. It's like at Aardvark right now, we're going through the process of getting SOC 2. And that's how SOC 2 works, right? Is that you go through this whole process getting ready for the audit and trying to clean up everything ahead of time. And then you have the audit, which is not typically how we approach accessibility audits, right? Like, we don't have a client get ready for the audit. We just test the website as it is right now. So they're introducing maybe some kind of idea of like, hey, if you want to have your website tested for accessibility, maybe here's some things that you could check first and take care of before that happens to get a better result out of it. So, and then also with everybody talking about WCAG 3, like, you may have come across the same thing that I have. So I had a client, I think it was 2 years ago. They were building a new website and they said, well, we need it to be WCAG 3 compliant. And I had a really difficult time explaining to them why that wasn't possible. that this is not, there's no final guidance, right? Like you could see the conformance section is just exploratory. There's no details on how you actually reach conformance. There's no ideas around what would actually be sufficient to meet these requirements. There's none of that's laid out yet. So we can't do that, right? But we have guidance from this document itself telling us that if we go for 2.2 AA, that we're going to be far along the path when WCAG 3 comes out. And we're probably going to have to make some changes and make some adjustments, but we're not going to be completely lost, right? So just keep following the current guidance. Now, let's go and take a look at what our new guidelines and requirements are. And I'm just going to go through the table of contents just real quick. And these get organized into groups. So we have groups, we have 12 groups, and we have the requirements under those groups. And then inside those requirements, we'll take a look at a couple of them just to get a good idea of how it's set up currently. And I'm just going to jump to section 2 just real quick for a second, because we see section 2 is in developing. So it's a little bit further along than section 3, right? So developing means the content's been roughly agreed on in terms of what's needed, but not all the high level concerns haven't been settled and their details have been added, but they're not completely all worked out. And if you want to offer feedback on this, it should be making sure this is usable and reasonable in a broad sense. Okay, so back to the table of contents, because we'll just go through these real quick. So we have first group is images and media, where we have image alternatives, media alternatives, non-text alternatives, captions, audio descriptions, figure captions, and single sense. And all of that should sound pretty familiar from WCAG 2, right? A lot of the same kinds of concerns are being addressed with these. And then group 2 is text and wording, where we have text appearance, text to speech, which that's relatively new, and clear language. So that is group 2. Group 3 is interactive components, where we have keyboard focus appearance, pointer focus appearance, navigating content, expected behavior, control information. Group 4 is input and operation. So keyboard interface input, physical or cognitive effort when using the keyboard, pointer input, speech and voice input, input operation, and authentication. Group 5 is error handling, and we have correct errors, preventing errors. Group 6 is animation and movement, and I like this one, avoid physical harm. So that's an important thing and a nice way to word it. I think that really brings attention to what the actual risk is there. Group 7, layout. So recognizable layouts, user orientation, structure, and no obstruction. So that one we see a good amount of overlap with WCAG 2, I think. 2.8 is consistency. So consistency across views, just making sure that we don't suddenly have like a completely different structure on one of the pages of the site. And then group 9 is process and task completion. So avoiding exclusionary cognitive tasks, providing adequate time, avoid deception, retain information, complete tasks and unnecessary steps. And then group 10, policy and protection. This is an interesting group, and we're going to take a look at some of the things that are in here in just a bit, which we have risk and algorithms. Section 11 is help and feedback. So making sure help is available, and then feedback. And our last group is user control, under which we have assistive technology control, controlling text, adjustable viewport, media control, and content changes. So that's a broad overview of the different areas that we're taking care of and the different areas that WCAG 3 is addressing. Now, let's go ahead and skip down to one of these. Let's just pick this one. All right, and here we are. So this is assistive technology control. And it generally says users can control content settings from their user agents using assistive technology. And we have a core requirement that assistive technology is supported. And that just means content can be controlled using assistive and adaptive technology. And here we have some tests. So for each page, we're going to check that each control can be operated. We're going to check that reading produces the same results with or without assistive technology. And then it tells us expected results is that 1 and 2 are true. We have a core requirement that user settings are supported. So content responds to user's platform and user agent accessibility related settings. And again, we have the test that we would use to actually confirm that. Virtual cursor is supported. That's a new one. That's done in 2.2. Notifications are adjustable. So timing or positioning of notifications can be changed. And we don't have any assertions for that one. So just the core requirements and then one supplemental requirement. So again, the proposal right now is for bronze level conformance with this. So if we're calling this 2.12.1, which may or may not be its final number, we would need to do all of the core requirements. So we have, I think, 4 of them here. No, 3. And then we have this supplemental, and then some of them also have the assertions. We would need to do some set of the supplemental and assertions. Now, this one only has one supplemental right now. So does that mean that we would have to do it for bronze? We don't know yet. So that's something that's still up in the air. And then let's see. Let's go back up to the table of contents. All right, and let's actually go over to the explainer table of contents, and I want to go to 532 because this is where we're going to dig into those assertions a little bit more. All right, so, and this is telling us that assertions can be used as part of a conformance claim or to support an independent claim of accessibility conformance. They must be documented within the conformance claim, and the assertion may be made available through an organization's websites or other materials. So assertions would include the following information, which is a statement about the process that's being asserted, the date or date range when the procedure was completed, the scope of the assertion, contact information for the person or group making the assertion, and the requirements or guidelines supported by the assertion. And then we have a whole bunch of editor's notes here letting us know that they are developing these requirements and methods and examples. And they have a whole bunch of things that they want our feedback on with assertions, like can they exist outside of conformance? Can they be used at the most basic level of conformance? Should small organizations use assertions without an unrealistic burden? So they have all kinds of questions for us if we want to take a look at those and give our feedback. And then using assertions. Okay, so I think we won't dig into that for right now. We're going to see some, I have some examples because there's some really interesting things that are in the assertions. And so we're going to take a look at some of those. All right, so this is the most fun part. All right, we're going to go back over here so we can go to these assertions. So inclusive data set is where? So I need section 2, 10. Sorry, I've got to scroll down to 10.2. Algorithms. Yes, so this is very interesting. So here's our guideline, 210.2 algorithms, which tells us that users are not disadvantaged or harmed by algorithms. And we see that we have an assertion. So this is a good example of an assertion, right? So title, role, or organization, right? So if it was me, I would say, me, Natalie, I'm asserting that something. Or if I'm doing it as my company, right, I would say Aardvark asserts that. And here's what we have, that content authors train AI models using representative and unbiased disability-related information that is proportional to the general population. So we definitely don't have any mention of AI in WCAG 2. And here we have it popping up in WCAG 3. So I think that's really interesting, right? So whatever WCAG 3 becomes, it seems pretty obvious that it has a much larger surface area than WCAG 2. And then if we look at the next assertion, right, no harm from algorithms, which is, the title, role, or organization asserts that content authors conduct usability testing and ethics reviews to minimize the possibility that algorithms disadvantage people with disabilities. So we're going to actually do the extra work of making sure that the algorithms and AI and different things that we're using as part of our process are not disadvantaging any part of the population. And I think that's really interesting that that's being included in here. And if you remember, the assertions are things that you can't visibly see or test or get your hands on or test with a screen reader, right? But they're part of your process, right? So that if I used AI as part of my process for building out a website and I wanted to make this assertion, like I would have to certify that I'm saying, hey, my AI models were using representative and unbiased disability-related information. And that would be part of meeting that particular requirement for the website. So you cannot make up your own assertions. You have to use the ones that are provided here. But that's part of the new WCAG 3 so far. So I think that's interesting. Another interesting one, 2931. So let me go back to, I hate this section too because it is so long. Sorry, I'm going to scroll down to 29. 2931. So this is a really interesting one. Guideline 293 is avoid deception. So users do not encounter deception with completing tasks. And we can see that the core requirement has this little developing tag on it, which again, the meaning is right over here. My head's not blocking it, right? Nope. Okay. All right. So during the completion of a process, pre-selected options that impact finance, privacy, or safety are visibly and programmatically available to the user by default. So this is basically an anti-dark patterns requirement. That's really interesting that that's getting included as part of a conformance requirement for WCAG 3. So I find that one really interesting. And then similarly, we have consequences explained, which are part of 210. And I think I'm going to try to just scroll down there. 296, 210. All right. So here we have our guideline is 210.1 risk. Users understand the benefits, risks, and consequences of options that they select. And our core requirement is that consequences of choices are explained. So choices with legal, financial, privacy, or security consequences are accompanied by a description of the benefits, risks, and potential consequences when users make the choice. So again, offering us guidance, offering us help in getting through a process where we're not accidentally agreeing to something that we're not aware of. We're not accidentally accepting some kind of onerous requirement that we're not aware of. We're not obligating ourselves to pay out hundreds or thousands of dollars to somebody without fully understanding what we're agreeing to, right? Again, like that built into a conformance requirement for accessibility. So I find that part also just super interesting. So we see that we have a document here that's got requirements about AI training and dark patterns and making sure users understand exactly what they're agreeing to. So much bigger surface than just making sure images have alt text and that we have the appropriate, labels on form fields and things like that. All right, so that's consequences. Let's take a look at 2615. So let me go back to the table of contents. I'm going to scroll down to 26. what did I say? 2615. All right. Which we have a trigger warning available. A warning is provided before users encounter triggers, and a mechanism is available to access the same information without the triggering content. So, another interesting thing that's kind of being added here, where we're taking into account, I think, a much wider range of conditions and disabilities that might affect people, right? I think one of the areas where current WCAG 2 falls a little bit short is in this area of cognitive and mental disabilities, where we're not always making sure that we're taking care of people's mental health and cognitive disabilities, but we see a lot of work being done here to make sure that that gets included as part of WCAG 3. So I find that part really interesting. And then if we take a look at 210, so let me just jump. I'm sorry, I've got to scroll back down to 210. I wish there was a way to collapse this, right? This whole policy and protection section, I actually find really interesting. This is where we see the assertions about AI training data and the dark patterns. And it's just really obvious that they're really making an effort to make sure that we're addressing a lot of different types of needs here. And so I would encourage you to come and really explore, right, the parts of this spec that are significantly different than 2, which would be this whole 2.10 section. Because we are really trying to be a lot more inclusive and a lot more accommodating for a much broader group of people, I think. All right. And then let's go ahead and take a look at 3.3. All right, let me go back to table of contents, and I got to scroll down to 3.3. All right, 3.3, the functional performance statements. So I think this is the one thing that we saw earlier that we haven't really spoken about yet. And so this one just tells us that each core requirement, supplemental requirement, and assertion, so we are familiar with those 3 things now, will be tagged with one or more of the expanded functional performance statements below. Now remember that all of section 3 is still in this exploratory, right? So all of this is subject to change. And they're telling us that the statements are intended to describe the functional performance of ICT, enabling people to locate, identify, and operate ICT functions, and to access the information provided regardless of physical, cognitive, or sensory disabilities. And we have this proposed list here of all of the things that we need to consider, right? Usage without vision, usage with limited vision, usage without perception of color, usage without hearing, or usage with limited hearing, usage without vocal capability, right, for voice interfaces, usage with limited vocal capability, with limited manipulation or strength, with limited reach, with sensitivity to sensory stimuli, with limited executive function, with limited reasoning, with limited attention, with sensitivity to certain content, which includes anxiety and content-based triggers, usage with limited language processing, with limited memory, with atypical physical attributes. And they wanted to actually break this list out because WCAG 2 just generally recognizes a group of cognitive disabilities, but there is such a wide range of possibilities within that description. And so they've really made an effort to break those out into what exactly do we mean, because the accommodations for those different things are not going to be the same. And so we have to think about not just somebody with a cognitive disability, but maybe specifically limited executive function or limited attention or limited language processing, limited memory, right? Those are all different things that would require different types of accommodations. And so that so far is part of WCAG 3. Again, this is in the exploratory, right? Section 3 is exploratory still. So this will probably be changing quite a lot before it's finalized. And again, if you want to weigh in on this, right, you are invited to, and I'll show you how to do that as we wrap up here. All right, so if we go over to our explainer, and I want to go to section 9, which this one has way less scrolling. The schedule, because this is the thing we all want to know, right? Please, when is this going to be ready? All right, so this is what we know. AG, which is the shorthand they use for the Accessibility Guidelines Working Group. Okay, so the AG is currently chartered through April of 2026. Don't worry that that's in the past. These charters get renewed all the time, right? And this was true when this document was published in March, right? Remember, this document was published on March 3rd. And that was true at the time. We haven't had a new document to let us know what the new charter is. So that just because that charter expired, it doesn't mean that work stopped or anything like that. The work continues. They just had to renew the charter. And then they tell you that the AG will continue to iterate within a single normative document with informative supporting documentation, which is what this is our explainer document, the supporting documentation. After exploring other options, such as breaking the content into modules, the group determined that the fastest way forward at this time is to continue creating a single document with varying levels of maturity, right? So it was getting so big and complex, they actually thought of breaking it up and then decided against that. They're going to keep it as this one big document. And they'll revisit whether mature content can be published as informative modules as part of the next charter period when content is more mature. And a final schedule will be delivered as part of this charter period. WCAG 3 will not be published until it covers at least as much as WCAG 2.2. So they've got a ways to go. So we don't have any concrete answers on exactly when, but we do have that it is being worked on. There is no definite schedule. And we know 2.2 AA is on the path, on our way there. So now, hopefully, between these two documents, which I will share links to on all of the platforms where I'm streaming right now, which is Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So on all 3 of those platforms, in the comments, I'll put links out to this document, which is the explainer document, and also links to this document, which is, okay, I'm just going to delete that. And then this document, which is the official guidelines document. And now you know that we have these different statuses for the different sections. So you'll be able to come in and evaluate exactly where things are when somebody makes a claim to you about what WCAG 3 does or doesn't do, and you want to check it. You can come here and you have a good idea of what the layout of this document is, what the different statuses of the different sections are, what that all means, and you'll be able to evaluate whether what somebody is saying to you is true or not, and come back to them with a really informed answer to their question or whatever they're saying. All right, and then to show you how you can influence this, so if you notice here that our latest editor's draft is a GitHub link. So if we click that, we land on this document, which looks very similar. But what we see is that there is a feedback section, which gives me a link to a GitHub repo. And I'm just going to open that in a new tab. And I'm going to go ahead and open this one. No, I'm going to open this archives link in a new tab as well. So here we have the GitHub repo where all of this work is being done. And there are open issues. There are lots of them, actually, 401 open issues on this particular repo where people are coming in and asking questions, asking for clarification, sharing their ideas about how different sections of the document should go, how they should be changed. And all of you are welcome to participate in this process. That is perfectly allowed. And the opening of issues on this repo, you can see, is restricted. And I don't know how you might get access to do that. If anybody knows, you could leave a comment and letting us all know. What you can do is participate on this mailing list, which the email address is here, and then all of the archives are available here. So you could go through and read what everybody is saying and taking a look at. So we've only had one message so far in August. You can see this is not There were none for July. There were 6 in June. This is not a high volume kind of thing, right? The process is going along pretty slowly, slow and steady, but it is happening. And you are welcome to post to that email address, right, to join in the conversation and give your opinion, answer any of those questions that the editors are specifically asking for feedback on. If you want to be involved in this process, by all means, jump in, join in. Let everybody know what your opinions are about different parts of WCAG 3 and what direction it should take. And if you're happy or unhappy with the way things are going, and the reasons why, right? Like, get involved and share your ideas. All right. Let's go through some quick, frequently asked questions just to wrap things up here at the end. And let me go back over to our official guidelines. I'll keep that up on the screen while I do this. So we've already answered it a couple of times in the stream, but you may be wondering, I've seen people come and go, so you may not have been here the whole time. When will WCAG 3 be finished? So we don't have, the best date that we have from the working group is a few more years. That's all we know. So keep in mind, WCAG 2 came out in 2008. WCAG 2.1 came out in 2018, so 10 years later. And then WCAG 2.2 was it 2022? I think so. We could double check that and make sure, right? But these specs, they take years. They take years to work out, right? We have a big group of people who are involved, and it takes a long time to kind of get everybody to a consensus, and we need to explore all different kinds of directions, all kinds of different ideas. And so it's a slow process, but it's a slow process on purpose, because we do want it to be complete. And then so we saw that they had conformance levels, proposed conformance levels, because again, section 3 is exploratory, so that might be disappearing or it might be changing. But currently we have the 3 conformance levels, which are bronze, silver, gold. Now, if you try to search specifically for WCAG 3 and silver, if you try to do a web search for that, you're going to get more results than you might expect. So I just wanted to give you a heads up on why that is. So you know how when companies work on a project, they have like a secret code name for the project, right? Like, oh, this is Project Blue Heat or whatever, right? Because they don't want to, maybe the product or the service doesn't have an official name yet, or they don't want competitors to get an idea of what they're doing. And so they come up with these code names. So the original project name of WCAG 3 was silver. So silver means a little bit more than bronze and gold do in the context of WCAG 3. So I'm just giving you that heads up. If you see a lot more than you expected to see, if you add silver to your WCAG 3 search, that's why, because that was the original project name. And then the assertions. So are assertions mandatory? So they do seem to, so far, again, like this document is still developing, right? So it's not final. So far it seems like the assertions are a la carte, but you will have to do a minimum number of them. So far there are 28 of them that are spread throughout all of those different requirements. And no specific single assertion is required at this point, but we do see in the description for the bronze, silver, and gold level that some number of the supplemental requirements and some number of the assertions are going to be required for conformance. So it may be a case where maybe there's 3 or 4 assertions on a requirement, and maybe to do bronze, you have to do 1 of those, and to do silver, you have to do 2. That's a possibility, but we just don't know yet. But that's the proposal. So you can't make up your own assertions, and you'll probably need to do some subgroup of what the assertions that are available in the spec. You'll have to do some subgroup of those in order to claim conformance. So can you write your own assertions? No, not for conformance. So, I mean, you can write your own assertions, but they're not going to have anything to do with accessibility, conformance, or conformance with WCAG 3, right? Like, Just like I could say anything I want right now, it doesn't make it part of WCAG 2. So you could make assertions about what your process was of building a website, but they're not going to be part of the official spec, and they aren't going to get you any closer to being conformant with WCAG 3. And then another thing that I've seen some people be concerned about is, well, instead of meeting all the core and supplemental requirements, can we just use assertions and just get bronze by using assertions? Which, no, they cannot be used as alternatives to those core requirements. So they build on top of the core requirements. They don't replace them. And then we do have the important concern that a lot of people have, where this may be a part of the spec where you maybe want to get involved in sharing your opinion. The question is, like, what stops a company from claiming all of the assertions? Because part of the definition of the assertions is that they cannot be independently verified. They just mean to copy work that's completed that cannot be verified by independent testers. And so far, the spec says that WCAG will not require organizations to provide supporting documentation in order to reach conformance. So that's a potential gap, and that might be something worth getting involved in and working out exactly how those are going to work. Should we start preparing for WCAG 3 now? Well, preparing for what exactly? Because we only have things that are developing and exploratory. We don't really have anything final. There's nothing there. So what you're going to focus on now, like what you're going to do when you go back to work tomorrow morning, 2.2 AA, right? Unless you have a jurisdiction where you're actually going for a different version of WCAG, then that's fine. But 2.2 AA in the doc itself says put you close to WCAG 3. And we also know that 2.2 isn't going to be deprecated for years after WCAG 3 is final. So we have a long period of time where we can worry about getting our sites up to date with WCAG 3 once the spec is actually final. Another thing you might notice is that the changelog for this spec stops. This document was published in March, but the changelog actually stops in September. So does that mean nothing's being done? No, absolutely not. They're still working. It's just that they haven't logged or shared publicly any substantive change since last September. So that's almost a year. So that is something to know. But like I said, these specs move slowly, and that's on purpose because we want to be very careful and make sure that they are very thorough and make sure that we're helping as many people as we can, but that we're not creating unrealistic burdens on companies and individuals who are building websites. So it has to be attainable, it has to be realistic, but then it also has to be accommodating. So we're walking a really fine line, and it takes a lot of really careful thought and a lot of discussion and a lot of thinking and a lot of planning and a lot of testing out of things. All right, so that is WCAG 3, where it is now, what we can expect in the upcoming few years, probably before we see a final spec of WCAG 3. And for now, follow WCAG 2, probably 2.2 AA. You're going to be ahead of the pack. If you are compliant with WCAG 2.2 AA, you're going to be all ready for 3 when it comes out. And you may have to make some updates and adjustments, but you will have plenty of time to do that before WCAG 3 becomes legal requirements in different parts of the world. And we know that because, like I said, WCAG 2.0 is 18 years old and is still the legal requirement in many jurisdictions around the world. So we know these things don't change that quickly. So thank you so much for joining me today. Like I said, I do these every other Wednesday at this time. We do a whole variety of different accessibility topics. We do how to test with screen readers, how to test with keyboards. We look at development tasks and how to build things out. We've looked at how to use AI for building things with accessibility and how to test with accessibility. We look at how to remediate things. We look at different aspects of WCAG and conformance. all different things. So for all different levels as well. So beginner, intermediate, advanced, wherever you happen to be, developer, designer, project manager, website owner, one or more of the streams will be for you because we cover so many different topics at so many different levels. So every other Wednesday afternoon. Thank you so much for joining me today. Again, my name is Natalie Maclees. I am the founder of Aardvark, which is an accessibility testing platform. I hope that you can join me again 2 weeks from today. I will see you then. And I hope that between now and then, you have a wonderful time and enjoy this wonderful summertime that we're having. Unless you're in the Southern Hemisphere, in which case, enjoy winter. All right. Thank you so much and have a wonderful 2 weeks.